Well, I think we're going to have to completely rethink what management structure is about, but we already are doing that now. I mean, in some sense, most work gets done in terms of projects and not in terms of siloed organizations. And these projects are almost always cross-functional. They're almost always virtual. You're now pulling together half a dozen people in a virtual team, if you wish, or a virtual project that can be spread around the world. So management is no longer a question of control, but management is a question of how do you nurture, how do you enable, how do you accelerate learning.
So there is the topic learning. What does all this mean for corporate learning? I mean, the skills people have right now working in companies, are they prepared for such a huge change?
Well, it's not so much, I mean, the corporations themselves are not prepared, nor are the individuals prepared. In fact, why I'm here at this DIY conference, do-it-yourself conference, or do-it-together conference, actually, is to look at alternative forms of productive inquiry and learning. Because I think that in a world of plasma, in a world of constant change, what you have to do is bring back intrinsic motivation for us to become self-learners. And the catch today is that there is so much access, there's so much information that we can access today, that once you decide that you want to find something out, you can find it out on your own. But it's not abstract anymore. You usually want to find something out to get something done. So we're moving back to the belief of the importance of doing stuff. And then getting stuck trying to do something then generates the passion to go out and find more things about it. So you don't kind of build up an inventory of knowledge or skills, but rather is always kind of learning on demand, always having access to social community members, information, internet information, and so on, that you are kind of constantly constructing new skills on the fly, trying things out. You have to be willing to be confused. You got to be willing to make errors, but you got to be willing to see as your job is to kind of pick up constantly new skills and find some way to have joy out of that. And so, you know, the real trouble with a rapidly changing world is corporations and governments, including Germany, says, well, go back and we will retrain you. Well, nobody my age, nobody 20 years younger than I want to be told to go back and get retrained. Something is fundamentally wrong with that kind of an answer. So we got to transform the corporate world where most of the work is happening, or the real world of making things, has to be transformed into a learning environment at the same time of a making environment.
So it's more a kind of informal learning you are describing. Will it totally replace formal learning?
My guess is that there will be still a minimal amount of formal learning that's going to be required, and there may be interesting opportunities to, you know, once you see why you need to know something that you can't just find little pieces about, to step back and say, okay, give me the bigger picture. If you take the whole open education resource movement, very popular in Europe, becoming more popular in Europe, OpenCourseWare in this country, you know, I can, and I work in so many different fields right now, you know, I can take off an afternoon and get a brush up on, you know, what's happening in nuclear, you know, energy, nuclear power, and so on, by grabbing, you know, something off the MIT OCW site or the Carnegie site and so on, Carnegie Mellon site and so on. So I think that what we're trying to do is to provide the context to say, when I need to know the bigger picture is there as well. So one thing is help me get unstuck, but the other thing is give me resources when I want to take the time to step back and say, I got to kind of figure this. I mean, I'm getting stuck too often. Let me take some time off to kind of figure out the bigger picture. And then how do I become a kind of a member of a study group or something that is kind of feeling the same way? Because most learning is social anyway. And that's why learning inside the workscape, even if it's a distributed workscape, becomes so powerful. Because if there's one thing we know in formal learning, is the best predictor of how well you're going to do, for example, in college, universities, is do you know how to form your own study groups? And if you can form a study group, you start to kind of learn with and from each other. Well, by the way, if you can figure that out, then you can move into a rapidly changing world, in the kind of commercial world, where you now look everywhere you're going, you can form little study groups, and everything you're doing becomes both a doing space and a learning space.
So what you're talking about, I mean, it's really a huge change. If you look at a human resource manager in a company, what kind of advices would you give to him to survive there?
Well, I think actually the role of the human resource person is going to become even more important. For example, one of the companies we study is eTelecare, is a call center in actually the Philippines, and they have structured something that people starting at the lowest level within 18 months pick up enough skills that they can be licensed brokers in the stock world. Now, how does that happen? Well, if you go into most call centers, you'll find that there's one manager, middle manager, often for 40 workers, or in this country, often 80 workers. Well, guess what? Over there, there's one manager per 4 workers, or per 8 workers. Now, what is that manager doing? That manager is a coach. That manager is a mentor. That manager is nurturing. So I'm going to claim that the kinds of skills that the human resource department has may become the one surviving skill that is required in management, because that ability to figure out how to construct social spaces that encourage people to help each other to learn new things should fall under the rubric of the human resource department.
How do you think these new technologies, especially social media concepts, will have an impact on all of this?
Well, I think it has a huge impact. I mean, it's so curious. I stepped down from running PARC, Xerox PARC, actually in the year 2000, 2002, depending how you count it. I left an institution that I had 9 reference librarians. I had 250 brilliant kids around me. I had a world-class IT infrastructure around me. And I went cold turkey. That's an idiom, but I went out on my own completely. Okay. After all these years, I tell you, within a year, I was more connected to more resources now operating all over the world because of the digital infrastructure and because of new types of media and because of social networks and because of all kinds of new ways to communicate, new types of distributed tools where I can actually, grab a telescope. I wanted to do something, 3,000 miles away and make my own measurements robotically. This is a different world. So in a sense, this ability to have your life transformed by this digital world we live in, I think is at least as impactful for people that are middle age, or I call myself an ancient, as it is to the young 20-somethings or the teenage kids. And everybody's focused on that. And what I find so interesting is that this digital revolution, this networked age, is transforming my life more than a 16-year-old.